Welcome to part 2 in this 3-part series where I'm showing you how to build out your hiring process using ProcessKit. So in the previous video, we set up our applicants board here and we organized our Kanban lists and everything. And we also built out some custom fields that will be preloaded on every applicant that flows through this board. Now in this video is the meat of this setup, which is our process, our hiring process. And so let's go ahead and create the process. Now I'm inside our applicants board and I'm going to be creating it here so that it automatically gets preloaded once we create it. So let's create that now. We'll just call it hiring process. All right, so now let's start out by just adding the high level step titles in this process. Now this one, I'm planning on doing about 6 steps. So let's start with review their application. Then we will decide whether we should invite to interview. We'll do a question mark since that's a decision. Then we will send the interview invitation. And there's a reason for why I'm breaking that out to a separate step. I'll show you that in a little bit. Then we want to have a dedicated step for interview booked. And I'm actually going to show you how to automate this so that when they actually book it, this step will be completed automatically. We'll get to that later. Then we want to actually hold the interview itself. We'll store some notes about our interview. Then finally, we will send the job offer. Okay, so now these are the 6 steps in our process. Now I'm sure yours will be a little bit more complex than this. You can insert additional steps or rearrange them however you need to. But in this video, I'm going to give you sort of a framework to work off of. And of course, you will be able to import this entire process as well as the board and all the custom fields into your ProcessKit account. I'll give you the link to that just below this video so you can import it. All right, now let's go back to step 1 and start to fill in some of the details. I'll start by adding some content here, adding some instructions for our hiring manager who would be reviewing the application. And I'm just going to write these instructions here. And let's go ahead and add a separator block just below that. So we have a nice clean line. Now I'm going to actually add a bunch of blocks or fields which will match the same custom fields that we previously set up in the board. And I'm going to show you how those will be automatically pre-populated using Liquid. Don't worry, this will all make sense after we have it all set up. We'll add the first field there. That was a text input, which we had called name. And what we want to do is pre-fill this value with this Liquid tag called project.name. And what that's going to do is it'll automatically find the value of that custom field on the project, and it will populate that field here. All right, the next field is an email field. That's email address. And we will do project.email. Next, we had location. That'll also be a text input. Project.location. Then it was the applicant's website. So for that, we'll use a website URL field. Project.website. Yeah, it's just website. Now the next one was the background info, and that was a rich text field. So we will call this background. Then we'll have their resume link. That will be a website URL. Project.resume_link. So if there was a space in the name of that field, we would replace it with an underscore. And then lastly, we had source. So that will just be a text input. Project.source. All right, so our hiring manager will review the applicant's information, which will be automatically populated in these fields right here in the first step in the hiring process. And then we're going to want our hiring manager to make a decision. And that it will be to either add this applicant to our short list of candidates that we're considering, or they will just archive them. So let's give them a radio selection. First, we'll add another separator, and let's add a radio selection. Save this applicant, question mark. And let's make this a required field. So in other words, they will not be able to complete this step until they make a selection. Let's call it save applicant archive. And I clicked required, which means that if I go over to our dependency rules on this step, now we have a dependency rule which will check for whether we've made the selection on this field. So once the person selects one of these options, then they will be able to check off this field. Then we'll go to the actions. And once they do check off this field, assuming that they have not, archived this applicant, because in that case we wouldn't want them anymore. If they didn't, and then they check off this field, then we want to actually move this applicant to the next list in our Kanban automatically. So here we will we'll move them to applicants saved, and we'll create that action. Great. Okay, so our first step in the process is all set. Now, a couple more things that I could have added to this step or any of the other ones that I'm just going to skip for this video, but you might want to add them yourself, would be one, to add assignments. So maybe whoever your hiring manager is, you can add them to automatically be assigned, or if you have multiple people, you can use our dynamic roles feature for that. But I'm not going to get into that in this video. The other thing that you might want to consider doing is setting up some dynamic date rules. So if you have like a deadline by which they need to review the application, say within 5 days of receiving their application, then you can add some like a start date rule or a due date rule to say this step must be due 5 days later or something like that. But again, you might want to customize those for yourself. We'll leave them out here in this video. All right, moving along into the next step, where we will decide whether or not we want to invite them to an interview. So they've already been added to our shortlist, and now after we've added a bunch to our shortlist, we still want to whittle that down to the very best candidates that we'll actually invite to an interview. Now, you know what? Since we're still going to want to actually see all of the applicants' information, like their application information, instead of recreating all these fields again in that next step, what I'm going to do is first delete this step, and then I'm going to duplicate that first step, and we're just going to make some adjustments to it after we duplicate it. Okay, so now we have the copy of that, and I'm going to rename it. And then we will say, so we're telling our hiring manager to review their information just one more time and then decide whether or not we should actually invite them to an interview. So if we move down to that final selection, we're going to change this to invite to interview, ? We will make this required. And we'll make our options invite to interview or save for later. Okay, now let's go to our automations. First of all, we want to remove that action that was duplicated from the first one. We won't need that. And we actually won't have any actions for this. But we will set a visibility rule because we only want to actually show this step in the process if we had decided in the previous step that they should be shortlisted. So we're going to add a visibility rule. It'll be a task field value. We're going to select that first step, review their application, and save this applicant. That's the field we're going to look at. And we're going to say it must contain a value. Let's just see what those values were. Save applicant. So we can just say save. That's good enough. So now this step will be hidden by default until we have selected save applicant on that one. Okay, doing good. So let's move right along into our next step here. Let's close these down. Now we're in the third step in our process, and this is when we're actually going to send the interview invitation. So here I'm going to write some instructions for our hiring manager. Then we'll add a separator line. Now here we're going to actually build out a template email, which our hiring manager can copy and paste into their email and send it off. Now I just want to note that as of this recording, we're in the process of building out our template email sending ability. That'll be coming soon. It'll probably be out by the time that you're watching this video. But for now, we'll just build out the template email itself, and that can be copied and pasted somewhere else. All right, now let's build out our email template. And for this, we will use the rich text field. And let's label this invitation email. In pre-fill value, let's actually write out our template email that they can use every time. And we can make use of a liquid tag here. So we could say hi, and we can use that first name field on the project, which would be project.firstname. And then we'll write out our email template. Okay, so I have finished writing out my email template, and we're using a liquid tag to automatically load in their first name. I'm just thanking them for applying and then inviting them to schedule an interview call with me. And I gave them the link to my Calendly account. That's the tool that I use for them to be able to book a call with me. Now we can just copy and paste this every time and send it off to our applicant. Of course, by the time that you're viewing this, we'll actually have the ability to send this email off from ProcessKit. Now on this step, let's go ahead and add a visibility rule so that we only show this step we have actually decided to invite them to an interview. So we'll add a visibility rule based on a task field value. It will be based on this step, invite to interview, and the field is that question, invite to interview, must contain invite. Meaning they must have selected this option, not this option. Okay. Now, when we've completed the sending of the invitation and we check this off, we do want to do another task action, which will move to that Kanban list so that we know that we have invited them to the interview. Okay, we're doing good. Now let's move on to step 4, interview booked. Now this will be sort of a special step because we're going to use Zapier and Calendly to automatically check this off. Now you or your team can manually check it off once they've booked their interview, but I'm going to show you how to automate that. And so I'm simply going to write in here. Now I'm just going to simply write a note in here to note that this will be checked off automatically. But I do want to set up a task action so that once we check this off, whether we do that manually or we have it done automatically via Zapier, we want a task action to occur, which will be to move this along in our Kanban list once again. And we'll move that to the interview booked list. Okay, so we're moving down into the 5th step here, and that is to actually conduct the interview and then write some notes. So let's go ahead and write some instructions for our hiring manager. Let's add a block where our manager can write in their notes. This will be a rich text input so that they can jot down as much as they want to. Interview notes. And let's make that required. So when our interviewer comes up to this step, they will jot their notes down here, but we actually want to save these notes in the main details along with the rest of the applicant's information. So here's how we're going to do that. First, we're going to go back into the settings on this block, and we're going to copy this special liquid tag so that we can reference it. And let's go back into boards and then fields. We will add one more custom field. We'll call this interview notes. And this too will be a rich text. And we'll set the default value of this field. We'll paste in that liquid tag so that it pulls in whatever was saved in that step field. And we'll go to our applicants board, and we'll go to the fields for this board, and we will just add that new field to the bottom, interview notes. Let's go back to our process that's over here. Now we're still on this 5th step, conducting the interview, taking some notes. Now below the interview notes, let's also add a radio selection, and this is where our hiring manager will decide whether or not they want to actually offer this person the position. Offer job, question mark. We'll make this required. And we'll say make job offer or save for later. The automations. First, we'll set the visibility of this task. We only want to show it if they've actually booked the interview. Otherwise, this wouldn't even be needed. So let's use the task completed rule. Interview booked must be completed. And let's also set a task action for when we mark this step as completed. we're going to once again move it along in the Kanban list. We'll move that to interview complete. All right, our process is almost ready. Let's get up to the sixth step, that is sending the job offer if the applicant should be so lucky. Now, in the previous step, we have this decision where the person would decide whether we will make the job offer or save them for later. And based on that selection, we will show either this final step, which is to send the job offer email, or you know what, let's actually add one more step to this process. Let's call them save applicant for later. One or the other will display based on that selection. So starting with the job offer, here let's give our hiring manager some instructions once again. I'll add a separator. And once again, let's use the rich text field to build out our email template. We'll call this job offer email template. And here in the pre-fill value, that's where we will build out the actual content for this email. Once again, we'll use the liquid tag to pull in their first name. That's from the project field, first name, comma. And then I will write out the email template. Okay, we'll create that rich text field. Of course, by the time that you're viewing this video, you should be able to actually send off this email from ProcessKit, but for now, our hiring manager can just copy and paste it. Now, as I said, this step should only display if we have selected to actually send them the offer, so we will go to the visibility rules and set that up. That's going to be based on a task field value from the interview step. Offer job must contain the word job, because it was make job offer. And we will add an action once again to move this to the Kanban list of offered job. Now this final step, which is to save the applicant for later, once again, this should only display if we had decided to save them for later in this previous step. So let's open this up, and first we'll give some instructions. And all our hiring manager would need to do once they actually see this step would be to check it off. And so we can manage that in the automations. First, let's set the visibility so that it is only shown if we have decided in this step to, I believe the response was save for later. So as long as it includes that word, that condition will be met. And then the action, when they check off this box, let's move that into our final Kanban list, which is applicants saved for later. Okay, so we have our standard operating procedure all built out. We've got plenty of automations built into this. Once again, there's probably a lot more that you'll want to build into your hiring process, but I think this is a very good start for you to get up and running with it. And of course, you can import this entire process and everything that we're building in this series into your ProcessKit account, and we'll give you that link to do so just below this video. Now let's see how this works so far. Let's go back over to our applicants board, and just to confirm, let's look at our processes. Here's our hiring process, meaning we are preloading it on every new applicant that we create. All right, so let's test out what we've built so far. We're going to see this dynamic process work its magic in action. Now, of course, in the next video, we're going to actually create the intake form where our application form will be filled out, and all that information will come into ProcessKit. We'll get into that in the next video, but let's just see how this works so far. So we'll create an applicant. Okay, so we're in this new applicant, the project, and you'll notice that you only see the first task in the task list, and that's because the rest of the tasks are hidden by default, thanks to those visibility rules that we've built into our process. Each task is going to reveal itself as needed as we get up to that step in the process. So the first step, of course, is to review the application. Let's open it up. Now, we have not built out our application form yet. Once we do that in the next video, these fields, next time we run this, will be pre-populated automatically. But let's just sort of like pretend that they've been pre-populated. And then what we need to do is decide, should we save this applicant or should we archive them? We're going to save them so that we can move on with our process. And we will update that setting. And so now that we've saved them, we are actually able to check this task off. Great. Once we decided to save them, now it revealed the next step in the process, and that is to decide whether we should invite them to the interview or not. Let's open this up. And once again, it will copy in the application data, but we don't have that yet. But the only thing that we do need to do is decide whether or not to invite this person to the interview or not. Now, you'll notice that we cannot check this task off until we've made that decision here. So let's go ahead and invite to interview. We will update that setting. And now we can check this task off. Now, by the way, I'm just going to pause here and open up our board in a separate tab so we can flip between it. I'm going to go into that applicants board just so that we could see that this applicant is now in the saved column. It was actually moved there automatically as we completed that task. So now we're up to sending the invitation, and we will open that up. And later on, when we actually have their first name saved in the application form, that will automatically display here, but we don't have that yet. We'll get into that in the next video. But we can copy and paste this to send off this invitation email. By the time you're watching this video, of course, you'll be able to send this directly from ProcessKit. But let's just pretend that we've gone ahead and we've sent that off. So we'll check this task off and complete it. And by completing that task, we have now revealed the next task, which is interview booked. Now, in the next video, we're going to set up Zapier so that when the applicant books the interview on my calendar, that booking will automatically check this off. So let's just sort of like pretend that just happened, right? So let's check this off. We could either do it manually or we'll have Zapier do that. And you can see that it revealed the next step. For now, let's just go check our board and refresh this. Of course, it skipped over to interview booked. It was over in invited to interview, but now it's in interview booked. And we can now actually conduct the interview whenever they've actually booked that. Once our interviewer, the hiring manager does the interview, they can jot down some notes about this interview. They can put whatever they want there, links, bullet points, whatever it is, and we'll update that. And before we move on, let's look at the details and scroll down to our interview notes, and you'll see that now they are displaying automatically thanks to that liquid tag that we had built in. So we're still on this step, and now we just need to make a decision. Do we make a job offer or should we save them for later? So first, let's test this out by making a job offer. We'll update that setting, and we will check this off, and we can check our Kanban board. Now it moved to our interview complete. And so now we can actually send off the job letter. Again, it would automatically pull in their first name once we have a real application in here, and soon you'll be able to actually send this from ProcessKit. For now, you can copy and paste it, but you can send the job offer. Before we do that, let's actually go back and assume that we had decided to save it for later instead. We'll update that setting. So now sending the job offer is hidden, and now we can see save the applicant for later. And all you need to do here is check that box. And if we go back to our Kanban view, now that applicant is in our saved for later list. All right, so it looks like our process is all working the way that we want it to. All the automations and everything have been working correctly. Now, it's not uncommon that you'll need to kind of troubleshoot a few things, go back and fix your process. Of course, if you have any questions about that, you can send me an email. We'll get you all set up. But I think we're all set on the process. And so now in the next video, we're going to actually set up the form, and we're going to hook it up to ProcessKit using Zapier.